Now, what I found is that with the volume all the way up, this is good. This is a good enough microphone that we can record most everything in this. How the discussion is going to proceed is going to be basically we're going to do it for about half an hour, 45 minutes, right around there. And we are going to be talking about the bad examples we found and counter them with the good examples that we found of art being used, at least peripherally, in that conversation space that talks about race and the discomfort of race relations as well as the benefits. This world is a remarkable place, and one thing I am learning is that it is very rare that additional information or celebrating somebody else's culture will dilute your own. I have found that more often than not, it strengthens, expands, and deepens your own perspective to be able to learn enough about somebody else, to care enough about somebody else, to celebrate the difference that somebody else has or shows. It's also my observation that I think that the strongest moments of, as we look through history, the strongest moments of civilizations and cultures, I believe, does come when there's evidence of differences being celebrated and encouraged. Several years ago, when I was still at BYU, a friend of mine who's absolutely remarkable, she was an art historian and an anthropologist, and was really pretty much the only voice in the West that Syrian archaeologists were willing to come to the university that she was working at to actually speak. Which I thought was really kind of interesting. They came to BYU, two Syrian archaeologists, to talk about some things that they discovered. There were a couple of towns that they were, these two archaeologists were examining as anthropological studies of the history of Syria. And of course, this is before the Syrian Civil War. One of these towns they saw had evidence of Jews, Muslims, and Christians living together, sharing space together, and working in each other's spaces. And the community was vibrant, the community was healthy, the community showed lots of evidence of really high standard of living. And this was about 1,000 years ago in Syria. We also see examples of, there was a community of Muslims in New York and a community of very traditional Jewish community. But neither of them were large enough to have their own worship space in this area in New York. So the Muslim community approached the traditional Jewish community and said, would it be okay if we shared spaces? So, we'll celebrate on Friday, and because you guys can't operate elevator buttons and light switches on your Sabbath, we'll have volunteers work with you to do that for you. And so this Jewish community, this traditionalist Jewish community said, yeah, absolutely. And they ended up supporting each other. And as far as I know, they still support each other. And this is during a time when that should, you look at the Palestinian issues that are going on right now. And I have a friend who has family in Palestine who are Jewish, but evidently they're not Jewish enough to be considered or to be respected as citizens of Israel. And it's, and to see that kind of community sharing during a time of, media propounded strife is really refreshing. I shared one of the negatives that I found, the Soviet racial profiling poster with 18 different races shown to help citizens identify the criminal elements. And the positive that I found, well, there were a number of them, But I think that several years ago, I was in Puyallup, Washington, and I gassed up my car before returning home at a gas station. And I thought I recognized how these people were speaking to each other, and I introduced myself and let them know I'd been in Iran and in the Middle East a little bit. And these two guys, one was Jewish, one was Muslim. These two men, they grew up as brothers, and they loved each other completely. And they came to the U.S. to start a business here because they thought it was a land of opportunity. And this is, again, during an era when Jews and Muslims, we think, are not supposed to get along with each other. But these guys, their lifelong dream since they were little boys was to have a business together. But I would like to go around and have people give examples of a negative, dividing or division propounding use of art and a unifying use of art, having both. So who would like to go first? Go for it.
Okay, I'll start with the negative one I saw. It was like one of those like political cartoon things. And it was of an African American, like, he looked like a huge, they made him look like a huge monster, like a monkey monster, and it made it seem like he wanted to take over the US. Well, I actually saw two bad ones. And then the second bad one I saw was a bunch of people from different races. So like immigrants coming in, but like as they passed the border, they started turning into rats. And that made me so sad. I was like, that's horrible.
That is horrible.
Yeah. And the good one that I saw was, I forgot who the artist was, but it was just a picture of a bunch of people together, and they're all like cheering, like unite, and it's like this super cool, like the way they did unite. I like it. I don't know how to explain it. It's colorful. It's cool.
I appreciate that you see both of those, the negative and the positive as well. And political cartoons, they're designed to be particularly evocative of strong emotion, I think, to get people to engage with the newspaper somehow. And I think you're right. They're really good at dehumanizing people and characterizing, making caricatures of people. And I think you see that really well. We talked a little bit earlier about seeing that in World War I, World War II. You really see that. Just the raw dehumanization is really astounding, and it's nasty. I grew up with 3 Navajo brothers and a Shoshone sister, and I was not aware growing up that these were my foster siblings. It didn't seem like that to me, and my Navajo brothers I've lost touch with over the years, and my Shoshone sister, she's actually an extra in that TV series Yellowstone. She told me not to watch it because she thought it would be too abrasive for my delicate sensibilities. She still thought of me as a little brother, and she passed away a couple years ago because of COVID. But it was really cool to have her in our family because my daughters got to see the kind of blessings that I had growing up with that, having Indigenous people in my awareness that could be my heroes was really a wonderful thing that very few kids, I think, in the U.S. get to experience. I think if you guys get a chance to go to Southeast Washington, the Yakama Nation has a museum that is particularly heartbreaking and very hard to deal with, where they have set up this beautiful museum. It is in the shape of a traditional Yakima Nation building, but it really lays bare the federal government's program for, I don't know how else to say it, the whiteification of the indigenous people in the U.S., where they would beat the children for speaking their native language, and they would cut their hair and punish them for trying to have any sort of identity that was not Caucasian. Yes.
I was learning about that in my class like a few weeks ago, and the indigenous people were also like sent to boarding schools.
That's what
from
I'm
their
exactly what I'm
culture,
talking about. Boarding schools, yeah, and they were horrible. And in your studies, did you come across the finding of the graveyards for little kids? There's in these sites that had the boarding schools, they are finding graveyards, unmarked graves of children's bones because of little kids that will never that won't whose families didn't get to see them again. But on the other side of that, my siblings came to our family because at that time, this is way in ancient days as the Earth's crust was cooling during the 70s. At that time, public schools on indigenous lands were the worst underfunded public schools in the country. And many families felt that it was better for their kids to live with families like mine and go to schools with me than it was to continue in their schools near their homes. And what is really interesting, I think that my sister was a really good success story of that, because she was able to navigate that journey and finding her place within multiple cultures. I remember growing up and going to powwows and knowing who the dancers were and just enjoying that as a matter of course and not realizing that our family was a rarity in this kind of environment. And she grew up being able to navigate the educational system that she otherwise would never have access to and being successful. Who else can give a negative example and a positive example? Go for it.
One of the negative examples that I just remember and had it come up at one point was Peter Pan, the animated movie, and how the Indians were portrayed as extremely racist. And back then it was, but it wasn't seen that way. But now when people look back, they're like, that is terrible how you portrayed them. And then as positive one, I think a lot of artists are using their voice for modern movements, like the Black Lives Matter movement, or like that one, just how people are trying to unify each other through art in that sense. I don't have like one single specific work since that's such a blanket of them, but
the perspective has shifted quite a bit. And I do think that it is not entirely fair to look at what previous people have done. Just like you said, they didn't know at that time or they weren't aware of it, but we are aware of it now, and we can use that, I wouldn't say as a cautionary tale, but in our awareness, hopefully prevent that kind of limited scope of perspective from continuing. I look at paintings of Norman Rockwell are what he observed as a white American. And we look at them and we see that there are many paintings that were exclusively for white audiences. And then he also did a series of the desegregation of schools. And I think everybody's seen the Norman Rockwell painting of that first little girl going into a desegregated school. Which was at that time incredibly powerful. But give me another example of a negative and a positive.
So the first two that came to mind when I was thinking about this assignment was the fashion house Dolce & Gabbana has done a ton of racist stuff. Like they used really weird names for the products. Like they did a shoe that they named the slave shoe. It wasn't even that long ago. And they've done, I think it was 2020, they did a commercial, like an advertisement where they have this like beautiful Asian woman, but she was trying to eat like a huge cannoli with chopsticks, and obviously it wasn't, it was like super demeaning. It was so bad, and people were freaking out about it, but they keep doing really weird things. And they've also made actual products like that have depicted certain cultures kind of like in a character way, like earrings and stuff. Really bad. But then a positive example, and I don't know if they've always been good at this, but the last few years at least, the fashion brand Gucci are very inclusive in all their ads. Just recently, they hired a girl with Down syndrome to walk the runway and to do modeling for them. And their ads, if you guys have seen them, they're not like typically like, oh, beautiful fashion models wearing fashion. It's like people with big teeth, like with marks in their face. It's all kinds of sizes, all ages, people with disability, people of all nationalities, just like super inclusive. And it just looks cool. It just looks like art. It looks more like art than just typical boring fashion, if that makes sense.
Well, I think there's a trend for these pseudo-historical TV shows that we've all seen. Just in the last several years, the cast is more inclusive and indicative of the demographics of the viewers than they are of the producers. And it's, in The Great is one excellent example, I think, where the cast, they've tried to be very inclusive with the cast to so that all viewers can find some point of resonance with there, even though historically they may not have been entirely accurate at the time. And I think since you're putting your own spin on things anyway, why not? Why not be inclusive? It doesn't hurt anybody to be inclusive, but it does expand your potential customer base quite a bit, I think.
Another thing I thought of when you were talking about like how what they do for the Native Americans, like my husband and my mother-in-law are Native Hawaiians, and yeah, Americans came there and just took it and was like, you guys can't use the beaches anymore, you're not allowed to surf. It's like took over, put the queen in prison, and yeah, you weren't allowed to speak your language, so that's how Pidgin came about and stuff.
Yeah, the queen was essentially kidnapped, arrested,
Yeah.
and I don't know, I think
didn't
kidnapped
know
is probably
anybody.
better, but she was held hostage in her own home
Yeah.
until she ceded the islands to the
That's
United
awful.
States. Yeah.
There's a ton of like artworks and photographs from that time of just like white people surfing, and it's just like, where are all the locals?
In the 19th century, Maori kings and Maori princesses and princes, the royalty, when they were asked to draw self-portraits, they would do portraits of their tattoos because the tattoos identified them. That's who they were. Every element of Moko tells a story, and it's vital to the story. And when in the process of colonization of New Zealand, Moko was made illegal. And so you couldn't have traditional Maori tattoos. You couldn't, and that was done, I think, specifically to strip identity from the people that were being colonized. About 16 years ago, while I was at BYU, there was a Maori group of artists that came, and I made friends with the gentleman who was responsible for the return of Moko. And it was scary for him because it was illegal. He could be put in prison, but he did it anyway because that's who his people were. You know, that was the identity. And finally, after over 100 years, mocha was made legal again. And he was invited by the New Zealand government to do a traditional mocha ceremony with a volunteer, a model who had her legs from hips down tattooed in traditional designs. And very much a reversal of what his grandparents had to deal with. So that was very cool. Can I get another negative and positive set of examples? Yes, Jason.
There's this one, I think he's a political cartoonist, his name is Dan Hart. He did this like one depiction of some waves and like just making her look very like unflattering, like in such a way that it could be taken as racist. But it's like, oh, just all type of things. But and then there's this one oil painting. It's called Selma. It's just depicting like the civil rights movement and including a whole bunch of people walking towards the Capitol from Selma to there to fight for voting rights. It also has like multiple races in the picture. It's just all really good. So.
All right, excellent. Is anybody familiar with the tradition of the shooting chant? Southwest nations in the U.S. have shared traditions of sand painting, traditional sand painting. And this is something that you find resonance in a lot of the indigenous nations, where there is an awareness of the four nations of man. And it's white, yellow, red, and black, sometimes including brown. And it's in the shooting chants, and you've probably seen images of Kachina as well. The colors represent the aspects of symbolism as opposed to skin color. And so white, for example, I think that this is a really good negative example. A lot of people were told, and when I was growing up, I was told that one of the reasons why, or one of the justifications for Caucasian superiority or European conquest was that a lot of indigenous peoples saw this return of white as fulfillment of prophecy. And that was used, I don't know if you guys have heard of that before, but in the 70s and 80s, that was used to justify an awful lot of, it was retroactive justification for a lot of horrible things. And what I thought was always interesting about that is that white in many indigenous cultures is indicative of wisdom. It's not a skin color. It's a symbolic color that represents wisdom. And so the prophecy was that the earth would be renewed and become a paradise again when human beings returned to following the path of wisdom. And has very little to do with Spanish conquerors. But I just thought that was really kind of interesting. And you can see that in some of the rock art in Utah as well. Appaloosa Canyon, other places like that. All right, let's get another negative and positive set of examples. Laura.
So when we did that assignment, I immediately thought about Asian African for skin. And also I thought about my culture and how we are races within our own comfort. So, and for example, in Asia, they have a skin like skincare products that are for to whiten
Bleach, whiten.
the skin. And there's one particular in which the person who's doing it is a beautiful model, and she's like, they have like two models, one that is super white in hair, and she's getting like black and black as a time stone, and she says that her success is because she's super white. And if she doesn't take care of her skin, she's gonna get darker, and like they present her like super black. And I have seen a lot of advertisement like that. That's so sad because that also made me think about my culture and how we're also racist within our own culture. Like I'm from the Dominican Republic, and is sure why you're seen like a successful person, or is you have dark skin now? And like Dominican Republic, we had descendants from Africa, so we are kind of dark. But yeah, with that, a good example is something that is like and there is a children's book that I really like that is called Love Care, something like that. There is a film of that is showing that it's a little kid that wants to do her hair, but her mom is not there. So she play a video of her mom doing her hair, and she tries to do it, but it's super difficult. So she start crying, and then her dad, come and see her, and like wants to help her, but kind of like give up. And then the child go to her room and cry. But after some time, like she opened the door and showed her the video, like, see, you can do it, and they do it and watching the video, so they're able to do her hair. And I think right now there is a really like popular advertisement and videos of accepting your natural hair. Like my hair, I have like my natural hair for just like 2 or 3 years, but it was a straight hair. Like I used to straighten my hair all the time because also for the culture. In your own culture, in my own culture, it doesn't look good to have a straight your natural color hair, and it's just until now because of good art that people are asking, oh, this looks good, I should do that the same for me. Yeah.
All right, excellent. It is astonishing how much we feel pressured by things like that. When I was in China, I saw people, I thought it was a religion type of thing, because you'd see people women with gigantic hats, and they would be completely covered with clothing, even on a hot day. But it's exactly like, Laura, it's exactly like what you were talking about. The idea was you wanted to stay as pale as possible. You didn't want the sun to touch you, because somehow being white was beautiful. And my youngest daughter is of Zimbabwean descent, and her hair, what I'm so grateful for is that she had not had to deal with that, where feeling like she had to straighten her hair. Her mom and her sister supported her entirely on doing hair that expressed more of who she felt she was, as opposed to having to spend hours and hours straightening it. Of course, what that means was that every 6 to 8 weeks, we would have to spend hours and hours braiding her hair. But it was astounding, and it was hers. It wasn't anybody else's, and that was And when I came to the Quran and started reading it, I remember several people getting very upset because they thought that it would dilute my relationship with the Bible. And I thought that that was kind of funny because getting new information, finding out new things, new experiences, it rarely dilutes who you are. And it more often than not, it feels like you're being expanded. But one of my favorite passages in the Quran, I believe it's, I'm probably going to get it wrong, but 49:14, I believe, is the reference number. And it says, God is speaking and says, I created you from a single pair of a woman and a woman and a man, and divided you into different nations, tribes, and tongues, so you could learn from each other, not so that you would despise each other. And we talk about Islam as being. I remember hearing people talking about, well, they worship Allah, not God, and I thought that was funny because when the Christian God, Jesus, was on the cross, the last prayer he uttered was to Eloi, which is the Aramaic enunciation of Allah. So Jesus was praying to the same God that billions of Muslims do. But that kind of thing resonates through most religions, that the idea that if there is a divine creator, somehow that divine creator has made you on purpose to be the individual that you are, not to be somebody different. And what is really sad is that that message, as it becomes political and cultural, starts to become distorted. And people want to be somebody that they're not. And that's, I think, from my perspective, and I shared it with you before, the universe has spent 17 billion years getting you exactly in the place that you are right now, making you the person you are. And I think if it's good enough for 17 billion years of the universe's time, it should be good enough for everybody. So you're exactly who you need to be. And we get another negative and positive example. Yes.
The thing that came to my mind about a negative example was this poster that I saw. And it was basically like how to behave in a public pool poster. And it had all these kids playing, and it was like showing kids doing like bad things in the pool and kids doing good things in the pool. And after looking at it, all of the kids who were doing things that they were portraying as bad were not white. It was very clear that the kids who were of other ethnic descents were the bad ones, and the kids who were white were the good ones. And I remember looking at it and being like, why? Like, you had so many options. But I think that was the point. It's like, yeah, it was deliberate that the poor behavior was portrayed that way, and it was kind of sad.
That's really sad.
Yeah. Yeah, it's stuck with me for years. I don't even remember when I saw it, but it was an impactful poster. And then the good example that I thought of was the new Ariel movie that hasn't even come out yet. And they are, I don't even know where the new Ariel actor is from, but she's definitely ethnic. And I remember like watching videos of like all these like little kids being like, oh, she looks like me. Like, yes. So anyway, that's my good example.
I really appreciate you saying that because, you know, we come across these messages all the time that are, and I would like to give the benefit of the doubt that maybe they're not entirely intentional, but it's hard to believe that they're so consistently unintentional. And it's my parents. I realize now how fortunate I was growing up because my parents supported this idea. My mom curated children's books so that I read some of my heroes were, I love the story of the Magic Brush or the Seven Brothers. The Magic Brush is this little kid in China who has this magic brush and he paints fences to help his neighbors keep their sheep in, and he paints extra fruit for people that are hungry, and they come real. And then the seven brothers were brothers who were from Asia, who each of them, they looked identical, but each of them had a different superpower. And a little boy who was incredibly smart, who was from India, and Anansi was one of my, these kind of things. My parents very carefully curated the books so I could see that they were heroes that looked like everybody. And I grew up in a neighborhood where one of my best friends was from India, another one was from Japan. His dad was an award-winning, internationally recognized encaustic painter and batik. He was a batik artist that was just phenomenal, and that's who I grew up with. And it was, and then later on you come across things like that where it looks specifically curated to help people that don't look like a certain ideal to feel less somehow. And I think that's absolutely terrible. But yeah, there's good and bad examples that we can see everywhere. Any other bad example, good example combos?
Well, we already talked about one of the bad examples, which was just like the posters from World War I and World War II. While we were talking, it reminded me of another, which is, I saw this clip from Family Guy one time where they were like trying to go through the border, and the border guard held up a little thing that had different skin tones and it said yes, yes, no, no, to letting people through the border.
Oh, that's horrible.
And so like it was only people that were sufficiently white that were allowed to go through. Like, oh, that's not cool. And it was really dumb. Like I remember looking up later, like what episode that was from. The whole premise of it was some terrorists want to do a thing, they need to get a white guy to do it because he could get everywhere without a problem, but someone who was of a certain skin tone would be considered a terrorist.
Right.
I'm like, yeah, that's kind of racist. I get it's satirical and kind of like trying to poke fun at the whole concept. I'm like, that's kind of bad. Then like good examples, one I was thinking was actually the movie Encanto. I like how it highlighted aspects of like Colombian culture, and they brought in like Carlos Vives, who's a famous Colombian singer, to use some music for it and stuff. But that's super cool to highlight like that culture and like the way society functions. That's super cool. I was thinking of an anime I watched called Megalobox, which is basically just Rocky, but everyone's using robotic arms except for the main character who's black, and everyone who helps him is like Native American and stuff. And he ends up like earning everyone's respect by just being really good without needing like robotic arms to fight.
Right.
And it's a really cool thing. Like in the end, it's just like everyone kind of gets along, and like the best boxer in the world is this like really rich white guy or whatever. But at the end, he's like, I'm taking off my robot arms and fighting him like a real person because he deserves all my respect. That's just really cool.
Well, there's another anime that you and I were talking about too, about Spanish visitors to Japan brought with them an African slave.
It was Portuguese actually.
Portuguese.
Yasuke, the Black Samurai.
Yeah. And he was adopted by a Japanese samurai and was trained, and he became
bodyguard with the shogun.
Bodyguard to the shogun. So the highest non-royal position that anybody could hold in Japan, he held. And it's exciting to me when we see stories like that coming out and celebrating people's achievements because they've achieved something remarkable, as opposed to fitting some sort of pre-established expectation of what should be acceptable. I love that.
That reminds me of another historical figure. Have you heard of Tomas Alexandre Dumas?
Yeah.
Haitian slave who becomes one of Napoleon's top generals during the height of his powers. That's pretty cool.
And that's incredibly cool because it's a story, again, that a lot of people don't know about because it doesn't fit this kind of paradigm.
And the largest pirate fleet in the world, the Red Sail Fleet, had like over like 400 something ships, almost like 100,000 soldiers. It was commanded by a woman. It was in the South China Sea.
Yeah, I love stories like that. except when, you know, you start finding out about like most prolific serial killers and stuff like that. The good stories are fun to hear about.
Source of achievement and success.
Yes, exactly. No, but I want everybody to kind of think about these things as we move forward. We're running out of time for today, but I'm going to put this on YouTube and have it so that everybody can look at it, refer to it when they write their reflection about this whole conversation we've been having. Art is never jealous. Real art is not jealous. It can't afford to be. And we should all be pursuing an advancement or an expansion of our own vocabulary of expression. So we can be more precise, more controlled when we need to be for how we wish to communicate. Now that being said, is there any way that celebrating or supporting or encouraging somebody who's other than you, is there any way that that can negatively affect whatever you do? I don't see how it possibly can. However, when you celebrate, encourage, and support, when you collaborate for the success of somebody who is other than you, I think the only thing it can do is expand your own capacity. Instead of diluting, it deepens. And instead of including your ego, I think it strengthens your own identity. When we support other people who are not like us, and by us, I mean, you know, whatever that represents, who are not Norwegian, don't have long blonde hair, who don't wear plaid coats, whoever is not like however we identify with, I think that makes us better artists on one hand, but I think it also expands the potential expression for art as well. So that's just something to think about as you move forward. I'm going to ideally stop the recording. Let's see, and then we'll post it on the YouTube for everybody. There we go.